And before we get started, I wanted to recognize our series sponsor. Envirologic is proud to sponsor the Michigan State Park's Centennial Campfire Storytelling Project. There is a Native American proverb that says, "Those who tell the stories rule the world." Great stories make people care, and Envirologic is supporting the Storytelling Project in the hopes that these remarkable stories will make those listening care. Care about the parks, about the storytellers' experiences, and ultimately about the planet. As an environmental consulting firm, Envirologic cares about Michigan's environmentally challenged land and strives to clean up and redevelop vacant, underutilized properties across the state while focusing on their mission to do good work to do good. The entire Envirologic team hopes that you enjoy tonight's event and that each of you has the opportunity to make new memories in one of Michigan's state parks this year. This is Heather DeRocher, and you're listening to the Centennial Campfire Storytelling Project podcast. Welcome to Episode 1, which features storytelling from our June 22nd event at Interlochen State Park in Interlochen. A fitting location for this first storytelling event, as this location was the very first state park in the Michigan State Park Commission. Brought to you by the Michigan Department of Natural Resources, the Campfire Storytelling Project combines state park stories with the engaging art form of storytelling. We'll be releasing an episode after each storytelling event, and you're all invited to attend these live podcast recordings. Each event will feature up to 5 vetted storytellers who will share stories about state parks or stories often told around the campfire. Attendees, meanwhile, are welcome to give 2-minute anecdotes or memories of Michigan state parks. Each event will be recorded. What you're hearing now is our podcast episode from our first evening, and we'll also be sharing this on our social media and at Michigan.gov/StateParks100. Our first story for this show is Meredith Parsons, a Traverse City native and a seasoned storyteller who shares a bit of her past with her story. A dead man saved my life.
I'm trying to tie in with the previous storytellers, so I'll, sit along with you. And my story has a full moon in it, too. It wasn't a super moon. It was just a regular old full moon. But it actually starts even earlier than that. When I was a girl in Traverse City, I'd walk down to Clinch Park Beach and take swimming lessons there. The lifeguard who taught the swimming lessons was a guy named Doug McNabb. And when I was 13, I thought Doug McNabb was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen in my entire life. He looked nothing at all like my brothers, which was a big plus. But he taught me about being a young girl in love, and he patted me on the head in a way that did not make me insane. And he patted me on the head and he said, "When you turn 17, your daddy can buy us a Mustang, and I'll take you to California and we'll be surfers. But as for now, tweet, out of the water." Well, a few years passed, and I came home from high school one day and looked at the Traverse City Record Eagle. At the front page, there was a huge picture of Doug McNabb in his Army uniform. Douglas M. McNabb, dead in Vietnam. Well, I about broke my heart at the thought of this sweet, sweet young man dead. But life goes on. Not very few years later, I was out here at Interlochen going to the University Division School of Music. And a group of us had gotten together for what college students do in the evening, and there was spaghetti and garlic bread and Chianti involved, I'm sure. And somebody had a rental on Lake Wabakoneta. Now, everybody knows Green Lake and Duck Lake, but it was originally, they were Lake Wabakoneta and Lake Wabakoness. Can anybody back me up on this? That's right. So we're having dinner and a fine old time on Lake Wabakoneta, and the moon is shining, and it's a beautiful northern Michigan summer night with warm air and good thoughts and not much of a breeze, but enough to keep the skeeters down. Somebody said, let's go swimming. I didn't have a bathing suit. Nobody had a bathing suit. But while everybody else was considering the possibilities, I ran down to the water and jumped in before anybody could see me. Swam out there. I guess it's a tie-in with the story about the Virgin Pines, because I was too. But I swam out to the raft, and the moonlight was such that the tall pines on the shore made a black band along the shore of the shadow, and then this bright silver light, and out in the bay was a raft, and I'd swum out there, and it was just a glorious evening. But by the time I got back to shore and everybody else had decided it was time to go for a swim, I thought, gosh, I grew up getting swim lessons at Clinch Park Beach. I wonder if everybody did. So I hung back a bit, turning some somersaults in the water, just enjoying the night, when I heard a little splashing sound from that band between the dark and the light. And I couldn't quite see, but I swam over and I saw one of the grad students from Detroit kind of making some splashes. And I said, Charles, do you need some help? Yeah, blah, 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 blah. And I swam right over to him. And as a drowning man will do, he tried to crawl right on top of me. And he was 6'2", and I wasn't. And I tried everything I could think of to get to the surface, and he kept pushing me down. And I went from being very relaxed and jovial about the whole thing to, I'm gonna die. I'm gonna die, right? That was bad. But then into my head popped a picture, the front of the Traverse City Record Eagle with a picture of me and this man entwined naked on the bottom. Somehow they got this shot. And the headline in the typeface they used to announce Pearl Harbor said, 2 dumb shits drown in Lake Wabakoneta. Actually, it was more clearly delineated, but I'm hoping to slip that through public media. And I thought, my mother will see that. Oh, I could not bear to have my mother's last thought of me be that vulgarity. And I thought, I must know something. Like all teenagers, I thought I knew quite a lot about the world. I thought I must know something. And my life started passing in front of my eyes. Just like they say, it was like, have you ever seen the Aurora Borealis, where it looks like just a highway of brightly moving lights? Well, that was me. And it went from the delivery room without stopping to that day on the beach when I watched Doug McNabb teach senior life saving that I was too young to take. But I was so busy adoring Doug McNabb because once he'd patted me on the head, I knew I could get away with anything and he wasn't going to respond. So I was attentive. And of course, what you do is paradoxically, you go away from the surface, You have to dive down no matter how much you want to go for the surface. You got to go deeper. And as soon as you do, they leave you and they go for the surface. And you swim up right behind them and you put your left arm under their left shoulder and up over their right shoulder in front, and you start talking very gently, which is the toughest part to do when you're going trying to get your breath. But I did it. And I swam him back in. And that was pretty cool. Though I was so embarrassed at our stupidity at being out swimming after drinking when our mothers had told us not to do such a dumb thing. But the real twist to the story comes many years later on my honeymoon. My husband took us to Washington, D.C., and I insisted we go to see the Vietnam Memorial Wall, which had been built by then. And I looked up his place on that wall, and I went and found him at the place where it's the tallest, the Tet Offensive. And there was his name, Douglas Meredith McNabb. M stood for Meredith, my name. And he'd never brought that up. All the time I'd sat adoring him with a child, as a child. If he'd had a child with someone else, I don't know. No. But it was a time where parks and nature and being in it and being free let young people learn a lot about themselves and about the world around them. And so I thank you, park people, for making this possible. Thank you.
A rather shy but very entertaining Diane shared her anecdote with us about family, camping, and making history.
Five years ago, our son calls and says, "Hey, Mom and Dad, you wanna meet my girlfriend's dad?" And we go, "Oh man, yeah, family, this has got to be serious. If we get to meet the family, yeah, sure, we'd love to meet your girlfriend's dad." Well, he says he's going to be camping at Hoffmaster State Park, and there's a bunch of people there, and they all have old trailers and stuff, and he's got an old trailer. It's really nice. I saw it once. It's big, it's really long, it's red. We said, "Oh, yeah, sure, we'd love to see it." "Yeah, you guys love old stuff, so you'll like to see it." So, okay, we said, "Yeah, we'd like to do that." Well, we owned our own business, and when you own your own business, you don't take much time off, but this event was on Friday night. You don't hire people to, you don't take off on Friday night. You had to hire somebody, you had to pay them. But we took the time off, and we drove to Hoffmaster. And, of course, they stop you. The little ranger guy stops you at the gate, and he goes, "Who you going to see?" "Oh, well, he's on lot, whatever it was, 29, and yes, family. We're going to see family on lot 29. "Okay, right up there, turn left, and he'll be around." "Great, thanks. Oh, we've never seen this guy before in our life, but we're going to go in." So we found him. We found the trailer. Yes, it was a big red trailer. We met Steve and Sandy. They were wonderful people, and had a great time. And we walked all around the park and met a lot of people and saw a lot of really cool trailers. And we're on our way home, and we're in the car, and Bob is really quiet. And then all of a sudden he says, "We shouldn't have done that." And I said, yeah, I know, honey, we shouldn't have done that. So on Saturday, sitting slow, we're at work. Business is a little slow in the afternoon. I'm up front working on the computer. I know where my husband is. He's in the back on the internet. And he calls me. He says, Diane, why don't you come back here? I got to show you something. And I knew what it was. And I went to the back, and there on the computer was a vintage camper for sale. That was in June, right? When was Hoffmaster? June? It was in early June. We did not buy that trailer, but Labor Day, we bought our first trailer. It was a little 68 Sprite. We sold that a couple weeks ago, and we also found a 59 Sun Cruiser, so we're here with our 59 Sun Cruiser. And because of Steve and Sandy, thank you, and our son, we've met some really wonderful people, and we've been camping with Tin Can Tourists and the State Parks for 4 years.
Julie 6 from Traverse City gave us a glimpse into her happiest childhood memories with this Michigan beach-loving anecdote.
Good evening, everyone. My parents met when they were 17. They were pregnant with me when they were 18 and got married at 19. And that was in the 70s. And it wasn't very long. They had 2 more kids. So I had a brother and a sister come shortly after me. And my dad worked for the auto manufacturing companies. And he worked really hard. My mom stayed at home with us. And I remember family life was pretty rough. I mean, if you can imagine they were 25 and had 3 kids under 6. You know, so family life was pretty rough. Mom stayed home with us while Dad worked. And I remember a lot of times, we didn't have carpet on the floor. We had just plywood floor. We didn't have carpet. And sometimes we would eat popcorn for dinner. And I didn't know at the time, but we were poor. And I remember that every year in July, my parents would bring us to one of the Michigan State Parks. And it was just a time where clocks didn't exist. We could eat as many marshmallows as we wanted. Hot dogs were for any part of the day. We could ride our bikes and, come back in 10 minutes or 15 minutes or an hour. We could swim, and we'd go fishing, and we'd play horseshoes, and we'd meet kids from different cities and different states. And it was just a time of, freedom from normal life, freedom from our burdens. And I knew as the eldest child how important it was for our family to get away and play some cribbage and play checkers and just get to know other people and see other families and share stories and laugh. And so every year I started looking forward to this annual vacation where we would go to a Michigan State Park and make these memories. And one of my favorite, although difficult memories that my mom instilled in us is on our last day camping, we would all gather together after everything was put up in the trailer ready to go, and we would all go down to the beach, hold hands, and say goodbye to the beach. And I'm super sensitive, so I would always cry and I'd say, why do we have to say goodbye to the beach? Why can't we just live here? This was my dream and this is what I wanted for my family, because we were so healthy when we were camping. We didn't argue, we laughed, we played. My dad was like a kid. My mom was silly. They would dance under the moonlight. And camping, you all are probably doing this for your kids, and you're making lifelong memories for them. But when I became 19, I decided I didn't want to live in Michigan anymore. I wanted to get out. I wanted to see the world. And I looked at the Navy or cruise lines, and I decided the cruise lines. Good choice for me. So for 3 years, I got to travel all the oceans. I was in the Caribbean Ocean. I was to Bermuda. I went through the Panama Canal, up the west coast of California, into Alaska. And at the end of my trip in Alaska, I finally thought, what am I doing here? Michigan has the best stuff. And so I came back to Michigan. I lived with my family for a little while. And I thought of all those beaches we said goodbye to, and I decided to move up to Traverse City and make Traverse City my home because we're surrounded by beaches and beauty and state parks. And this is my story that my parents have instilled in me, that you're instilling in your kids, that this is a wonderful place to be, a wonderful place to raise family and to make memories and to let some of those stresses go. And remember, some of the simplest things are no clocks and hot dogs and marshmallows all day long.
The show closed with a captivating story by Norm Wheeler, a spoken word artist who loves Michigan and reminds all who listen why we do, too.
Thank you. You all know the Michigan State bird, the Michigan State flower, apple blossom. Does anyone know the stone, the state stone? See? Well, there is a story that is the Michigan State story, the story of the state of Michigan, and it is the legend of the sleeping bear. So let's go there. Long, long ago, when time was young and the lakes tasted like glacier, there lived in the land we now call Wisconsin a great she-bear named Mishimakwa. And Mishimakwa had 2 young cubs, and they frolicked and played up and down the beaches and in the forests on the shore of the land of Wisconsin. And surrounding them were the winds of peace. Help me with this. Shh. And whenever the cubs got separated from Mishimakwa, she would call them to her like this. Ooh, ooh. Help me with that call. Well, there was a storm like Fred's storm, with lightning and thunder and sideways rain, and then fire. The land of Wisconsin was on fire. The forest was on fire, and the only escape was the lake. So Mishimakwa called to her cubs, ooh, ooh, and they padded down to the beach, and she padded out into Lake Michigan, and she looked back for her cubs, and they followed her, and they started to swim. And they swam, and they swam, and the sun came up, and the sun went down, and the moon came up, and the moon went down, and they swam, and they swam. And when the cubs grew tired, Mishimakwa would go back and grab one by the scruff of the neck and swim along with it so it could rest, and then let it go, and then go to the other cub and take it by the scruff of the neck so it could rest. And slowly, gradually, over however long it took, they made their way across the lake we call Lake Michigan. Finally, Mishimakwa, blind with fatigue, felt her paws touch on this side, on the land we now call Michigan. And she climbed up on a bluff and looked back across the lake, and way out there she could see her cubs, and she called to them, ooh, ooh. And she continued that call, and they continued to swim, but it was too far, and they were too tired. And one by one, the cubs sank beneath the waves of Lake Michigan. And so up on that bluff, Mishimakwa, she ripped open a hole in the ground and she keened out her grief, and she keened out her grief, and she yowled and she howled, and finally she fell asleep. And the Great Spirit Manitou, looking down, saw all of this. And he felt pity for Mishimakwa. And so he brought the winds of peace and covered her with a great blanket of golden sand, a huge dune of golden sand to be her resting place. And the cubs, he raised each one as an island, and he named them after himself, North Manitou and South Manitou. The islands are the cubs still swimming in Lake Michigan. And if you walk on the golden sands of the Sleeping Bear, you can still hear the winds of peace. And if you walk in the Manitou Islands, you can still hear her call. Thank you.